Este mediodía entrevisté a Graeme Robertson, es profesor de Ciencias Políticas de la Universidad de Carolina del Norte, experto en el tema del este de Europa, autor del libro Putin versus el pueblo. Y arranqué preguntándole si el presidente ruso Vladimir Putin esperaba que la guerra en Ucrania fuera corta, fácil, y desde su punto de vista si cree que cometió errores de cálculo al invadir el país. Esto fue lo que nos dijo.
He miscalculated disastrously. I think it was clear to anyone who's been to Ukraine. I've done a lot of research in Ukraine over the last 10 years. Anyone who knows Ukraine at all knew that the Ukrainians would fight for every inch of land. There was signs all over Ukraine, and the hashtag every inch was out long before this invasion. They knew that the Ukrainian army was much better equipped than it previously was. It was better trained than it previously was, and so the force would be much more motivated. And then even if the Russians were successful, they'd have to hold very hostile territory, against the population who would launch an insurgency. And I think that was obvious to everybody outside of the Kremlin before the war, which is why many of us thought there was no way a full-scale invasion like this would take place. It's simply too costly.
También le pregunté sobre el papel de los oligarcas rusos en esta guerra con Ucrania, pues muchos de ellos han sufrido pérdidas cuantiosas. Son cleptócratas, pero ¿también son criminales de guerra? Robertson puso el ejemplo del caso de Oleg Tinkov, quien escribió en redes sociales hace unos días que ya ni siquiera es millonario, no digamos billonario.
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of sympathy for the oligarchs, but one of the oligarchs, Oleg Tinkov, tweeted the other day that he's no longer a billionaire and doesn't want to be called an oligarch anymore because he's lost so much money. It's not I don't find that particularly sad, but it's true that many of the oligarchs have lost a lot, and what it demonstrates is that they're not powerful people anymore in terms of politics. They're rich, but they don't have the political power that they had in the 1990s. Putin, the first thing he did when he came into power really was to subordinate the oligarchs and make them follow his line. And so the oligarchs basically have to do what Putin tells them. And that's been clear for a long time. They're supplicants rather than oligarchs now.
También platicamos con Graeme Robertson sobre el carisma que tiene el presidente de Ucrania, Volodymyr Zelensky, cómo ha ganado el apoyo de su pueblo al permanecer en el país en medio del conflicto armado y el éxito que ha tenido utilizando sus redes sociales, en donde habla en ruso, que habla muy bien ruso, es de hecho su lengua materna, para informar sobre la guerra no solo a la gente de Ucrania, también intentar que lo escuchen en Rusia. Y esto fue lo que nos respondió.
Yeah, Zelensky is a phenomenon. Zelensky was not taken seriously by most Ukrainian commentators. He was seen as a political lightweight, even though he had a majority in the parliament and he had 70% of the vote when he got elected. So he had a real political charisma, which had been kind of wearing off. And one of Putin's bets was that he would run away. And instead of running away, he's brilliantly used his direct communication with both the Ukrainian people, the Russian people, and the international audience to kind of essentially live stream the whole war and his life, and it's been a huge hit. And he's now an international superstar. He comes from his propaganda team, his PR team has been amazing, and he's really made the best of it. He's also shown personal courage that many of us didn't really expect to see. And that authenticity and bravery really speaks to people, I think, in a really powerful way. And the contrast with the angry, crazy old man at the table in Moscow with no one within 20 meters of him is so sharp. So if you see all of this, then it's very convincing. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Russians don't see all of this. They only see the Putin side of it. They don't get to see the Zelensky side. And that's sad.
Otra pregunta para el profesor Graeme Robertson fue si la guerra en Ucrania va a ser, cruel como la estamos viendo, y larga, o cruel y corta. Y esto fue lo que nos respondió.
I wrote about this with a co-author in the Washington Post in December the 8th, before all of this happened, saying, essentially invading Ukraine is crazy. even if the war was successful, how are they going to hold the territory? Russia has been holding territory in Ukraine, two different parts of Ukraine already for 8 years. One of them, Crimea, they've held fairly well. But the other one, they've been unable to establish a secure government because they have to run through local gangsters. And they get in fights with each other, and you have some of them being assassinated, even by the Russians themselves. The idea that they could then spread that control over the whole of Ukraine, where the population is extremely hostile, is a fantasy. The Ukrainians are getting ready for an insurgency. We've seen what the insurgency in Afghanistan did to the Americans. The Americans have learned a lot about insurgency from this, and the Americans will support the insurgency. There's countries around, Poland, Hungary, Romania on the border, who would be supportive of the insurgency. And so all the conditions are there for a very successful, very damaging insurgency should the Russians try and occupy Ukraine or even large parts of Ukraine. Why the Kremlin didn't see this coming, I'm not sure. But they really don't have a game plan, and they don't have a strategy that's going to be effective, I don't think.
Finalmente, el profesor Robertson nos compartió cuáles son las implicaciones geopolíticas que dejará esta invasión de Rusia a Ucrania.
Implications are huge on so many different levels. On one level, Russia is the second largest recipient of migrants in the world after the United States. So people immigrate to the US to work. The next biggest country is Russia, where people immigrate from Kyrgyzstan, from Kazakhstan, from all over Central Asia. Those people are as the Russian economy collapses and Russians start looking for work, is going to put enormous strain on those societies all across that part of Central Asia. So that's kind of almost like the first line of geopolitical ripples, if you like, from this. Russia is also going to be one of the parts of this war that doesn't get talked about, is that essentially what we've seen is Russia occupying Belarus. Belarus has become, they took in thousands of Russian soldiers. Russia now controls the border with Belarus, and so Belarus is de facto no longer a sovereign state. And that's already an expansion of Russian power. Then the West Europeans, this is a huge boost to NATO, which people have been questioning the strength of. We're going to see NATO get built up and built up and built up. The Baltic states have already asked for permanent NATO, US, and British and French garrisons across the Baltic states. So we're going to see something that resembles in a way the Cold War, with a very isolated Russia and a heavily armed West on Russia's borders. It's not going to be the same as the Cold War because Russia's going to be much weaker than the Soviet Union was. Russia doesn't have the same kind of ideological